Welcome back. The ongoing battle between the Zambian government and the late former president Edgar Lungu's family over his final resting place has seen the High Court in Pretoria halting his burial in this country on Wednesday. The Zambian government and Lungu's family have been unable to reach common ground regarding giving the former president a funeral befitting of a former head of state. Zambia's Attorney General Murilo Kabesha contends that no burial should take place until all disputes regarding Lungu's final resting place are resolved, specifically whether he should be interred in Zambia with full military honors and customs and traditions as mandated by the Zambian law, or be buried in South Africa in a private ceremony as his family would like it. Lungu's family spokesperson Makebe Zulu insists that the former president's death should not be used as a publicity stunt by the Zambian government. So let's take that conversation forward with SABC News International Editor Sophie Mkwena. Good afternoon, Sophie. This is one of those that I was saying earlier on that it's becoming an ugly spectacle. It is not the dignity with which you would expect a former head of state to be buried. Talk to me about the dynamics that played themselves out at a diplomatic level, but also at the same time in terms of what they expose about the laws and customs in both these countries.
Well, I think there has been attempts to try and bring the two parties together to agree and find an amicable solution that will ensure the decent burial and the former president being honored in a manner befitting a former head of state, but also to ensure that the family is happy. Now, unfortunately, it was not to be. We know that the SADC chair, President Emmerson Mnangagwa, was very close to President Edgar Lungu, did intervene. He even sent an envoy, that is the Vice President Constantino Chiwenga, to try and mediate. It didn't help. We know that the South African government has been trying to speak to the two parties. We saw President Ramaphosa dispatching an envoy to Lusaka to engage the Zambian government, including a discussion with President Hakainde Hichilema. And that was the international relations minister going to Zambia. We know behind the scenes there have been people who are trying to speak to the family. There are also reports, I must emphasize, these are unconfirmed reports, because we are still struggling to get MK Party or the Jacob Zuma Foundation or the former president himself to confirm that there's also attempts from his side, the former President Jacob Zuma, to try and ensure that these two groups, they find one another and the burial is decent and the honor is given to the former statesman. But we are not sure about that process. And I think between now and the time where they will again, the two parties and those who are respondents appear in court, there will continuously be attempts to try and find an amicable solution.
What's the background and context, Sophie, for the benefit of our viewers who may not have been following this story? Why is this up for debate? Does it have to do with the relationship that existed between Edgar Lungu and his successor, Hakainde Hichilema?
Yes, it has to do with politics. Politics in a sense that when the current president was in the opposition, their relationship was very bad between Lungu, who was the president at that time, the arrests of Hichilema, and the back and forth in relation to the governing party or the party that is in power and the opposition. And later when HH won elections, then the relationship again continued to be tense because Lungu was stripped of the privileges of a former president the Foreign Affairs Minister is saying that it's based on the laws of that country that if you are a former president, when you get involved in active politics, you lose your PACs. In South Africa, it doesn't count whether you go back and be active. Here's President Jacob Zuma, he's got his political party, but he still enjoys the privileges of being a former president. And depriving him the privileges of former president, that would include traveling arrangements. And when he came to South Africa, apparently he had to find a way and means to come to South Africa and without any support from government. That's the family and his party. And therefore, their relations got even more strained. And he then left the message with families or engaged people who are close to him that if anything happens to him, if he has to be buried, the current president must not be part of those proceedings.
Sure.
He doesn't want him near his body. Yeah. And that's where the problem is.
Yeah, and what a spectacle it has all become. Let's touch briefly, Sophie, on the DRC-Rwanda peace deal. It was signed in Washington. And naughtily, I had the thought when I was Sophie that I wonder if the representatives from the DRC were confronted with that picture that was used to confront our president when he was in the White House, which had come from a scene in Eastern DRC. But that's beside the point. Talk to me about this agreement. What do we know about it, how it was brokered, and what it entails, and its likelihood of success?
It was brokered by the envoy of the U.S. president on matters of Africa. And then a decision was taken that these two countries, the foreign affairs ministers, must go to Washington to sign this agreement. You would recall that when the announcement was made about this process, they were in Washington. And therefore, that followed the decision by Tshisekedi, the president of the DRC, speaking to the Americans, asking the Americans to help them. And then the mineral rights deal was agreed on and included the process of normalizing the situation in that country. But I think for Africans, they see this as a terrible picture for the continent, that you have two African countries agreeing to go and sign a peace agreement that is expected to be implemented on the continent, outside the continent. If Rwanda was not a neutral venue, if DRC was not a neutral venue, Africa has got 54 African countries. It has got a seat of the continent, that is Ethiopia. This could have been done in any of the countries that was going to be acceptable by both parties. And therefore, there's a flag. It's not a good picture. In terms of the content of the agreement, I must say, Tula Sizwe, you are very familiar with these peace talks. You've covered this for a long time as a member of the international news team. When you were with the team, you know the processes of negotiations, and you know possibly about the Sun City talks and the comprehensive agreement and many other agreements, including the role that was played by Mugabe during the former president Kabila, who passed on. So when you look at the document, it's almost like all issues that have been discussed and have been agreed on, but there were violations. And therefore, the question is, who are the guarantors of this peace agreement? Who is going to ensure implementation? And implementation of peace process sometimes demands military support, security support. Yeah. Who is going to do that when we know that Summit has left and MONUSCO is a shell in the DRC?
All right, let's leave it there. We'll have to watch over the coming months how it all unfolds when the rubber hits the road in as far as the implementation of that peace agreement is concerned.